Hi friends, my name is Lauren and welcome back to my channel and happy Pride Month. If you couldn't already tell, I'm queer and I have a deep love for queer media of all forms. So today I wanted to go through some of my favorite books written by queer authors about queer people that you should definitely read all year round, but they're especially relevant right now as we're celebrating the joys of being queer this month. So I typically don't read contemporary romance, although I do have one to share. So this list has many different genres. Of course, there's nothing wrong with contemporary romance. It's just not something I typically pick up, but it is the main thing you see when you look up queer book recommendations. And so I wanted to make this list for people like me who read a wide variety of genres. So along with the one romance, I have a historical fiction, some sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and even some nonfiction. So hopefully there's something for everybody. I also think I have a pretty good mix of books that show some of the true realities and horrors of being queer, but also some that are not so soul-crushing and maybe even have a happy ending. Now, I will say I've enjoyed pretty much every queer book I've ever read in some aspect or another. Most of the books on this list I genuinely adored and gave 4 or 5 stars to. There are a few exceptions that I'll get to at the end that are kind of my honorable mention books. These are the books that didn't quite work for me, but I still love the queer elements of them, and I do think some people might just absolutely love them. I go back and forth on how to rate these types of books because on one hand, I want to be honest and give authors constructive criticism so that we can have more brilliant stories about queer people, but at the same time, we do live in a world where if queer media isn't overwhelmingly praised, it's just not going to get made. And we've seen this again and again with our favorite queer TV shows getting canceled after 1 or 2 seasons. Even if they're adored by the queer community, if they don't reach that mainstream success, they just get canceled. So I do want to be honest about what I disliked, but I do think I tend to give these books a little bit of a higher star rating than I would give them if they didn't have the queer elements, just because I think the representation that they bring to the publishing industry is so important. All that being said, a lot of the books on this list are genuinely beautifully written, so let's get into it. First, I'm going to start with the romance/historical fiction category. So this first one is definitely up there with my favorite books of all time, and that is Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. This is a sapphic historical fiction set in Victorian England. We follow Nan King, a girl from a small harbor town in a family of oyster catchers. After she sees the male impersonator Kitty Butler perform on stage, she immediately becomes enchanted with her, which is a feeling she doesn't fully understand yet. Kitty ends up returning her affection and taking her under her wing and bringing her to London to join her act. And we get to watch as Nan explores her newfound lesbian identity, and she discovers the many hidden worlds of queer communities throughout the city. Waters took a lot of real-life inspiration for this book, and it's just such an interesting look at the rich queer history of the city that's almost been erased at this point. We're led to believe that queer people just didn't exist until like 20 years ago, or that every queer person in history was forced to stay in the closet. And yeah, it was obviously a lot harder to be queer in this time period than it is now, and Waters does explore the harsh reality of being queer in this book, but at the same time, she also shows that queer people have always existed, and they've always managed to find each other and find community and create spaces where they can be themselves. So this book is definitely long, but trust me, you will not get bored. It is a wild ride, and I literally could not put it down, and Sarah Waters knows how to write a plot twist. I will say I read this right when I was getting back into reading, and I had just come out, so I don't know how much of my love for this book is because I hadn't read that many books in general before this, and I certainly had not read any books with queer people in it, but at this point I kind of don't even want to reread it and potentially ruin the magic of reading this for the first time at the time in my life that I did read it. So if you've read this, let me know what you thought. If it really holds up, maybe I'll get to rereading it at some point. And regardless, it'll always hold a special place in my heart. So next is the contemporary romance, and that is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I'm sure everybody's heard about this book already, but I just had to include it because it's so good. This is a sapphic romance set in New York City. We follow 23-year-old August, who has just moved to the city to start fresh at a new college. She has pretty much sworn off love when she meets a girl named Jane on the subway. They begin passing every commute together, and everything seems perfect until August discovers that Jane has literally been transported from the 1970s and can't leave the train car no matter how hard they try. It sounds absurd, but it's just so good. It's such a sweet love story, and I really love the sprinkles of queer history we get. Also, the added sci-fi-ish element made it so fun and entertaining. And yeah, this book made me laugh and cry multiple times, and it was just such a good time. And that's coming from someone who basically never reads romance, so. Moving on to the fantasy, sci-fi, horror section, my first recommendation is Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. If you've never heard of this author, he is known for writing satirical gay erotica with titles such as Space Raptor Butt Invasion, but Camp Damascus is his first traditionally published work. I've never read any of his other books, but I promise you it's not that kind of book. Camp Damascus is a horror novel with some fantasy elements. I think it's technically adult, but it definitely reads more as YA. It's set in a small evangelical town in Montana that's home to the most effective gay conversion camp in the country. We follow our main character Rose, who starts out very sheltered and believes everything she's been taught about God and what is sinful. However, strange things start happening around her, and because she is autistic and thinks very logically, she is able to start seeing through the brainwashing and uncovering the truth behind the church and the conversion camp that they run. I absolutely love the atmosphere that Chuck Tingle creates in this. It's so eerie and surreal, and it's such a quick, suspenseful read. I highly recommend reading this in the summer. It has kind of that like telling stories around a campfire feel to it. And as an autistic person myself, I thought the autism representation was really well done, and I really related to Rose in so many ways. I also think it does a really good job of exploring what it means to be religious, and the message is a lot more nuanced than just all Christians are bad. And I don't even want to say much else about it. I went into this pretty blind with no expectations and just had the best time. And as someone who's been wanting to get more into horror, this was such a good introduction for me. It's definitely disturbing at times, but I didn't think it was too scary. Next on my list, I have Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a YA fantasy novel set in a utopian city supposedly free of monsters. We follow Jam, who is a young black trans girl, and she feels safe and supported by everyone around her. So when a creature named Pet emerges from one of her mother's paintings, claiming to be hunting a monster in her town, she is very confused. She has to come to terms with the fact that monsters still exist despite everything she's been told, and they're even harder to catch when nobody believes they exist. This was such an emotional, powerful read. It almost reads like a middle grade. It has such a clear, simple message, but it also has some pretty heavy subject matter. I think this would be such a great read for middle school aged kids, but anyone can truly enjoy this book. It's just sweet and simple, but the ending made me literally sob. And I also love that it's a story about a trans girl, but her transness is not the focus of the story. Everyone loves and accepts her identity, and they don't even think twice about it. That's just who she is. Yet it's still able to explore these real societal issues in this post-transphobia, post-racism society. Next up in the sci-fi category is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. This is a sci-fi novella, and it's just such a unique and compelling sapphic love story. We follow Red and Blue, who are two time-traveling agents working for rivaling factions in the Time War. Throughout the book, they jump between different timelines and alter some small detail that changes the course of history and secures the correct future for their faction. Red and Blue begin leaving messages for each other across time and space, which starts out as taunts but soon develops into something much deeper. As their love grows, they have to grapple with their loyalty either to each other or to their factions, since their relationship could lead to both of their deaths if anyone found out. Honestly, half the time you don't even really know what's going on in this book, but I just loved it. It was so surreal and trippy in that way. It's just a beautiful portrayal of the sapphic experience of doing the most for the one you love, even if you met them like 2 days ago. It's definitely not for everyone, but I just adore this book. The prose is absolutely gorgeous. It's so poetic and lyrical, and if you're a character or atmosphere-driven reader and you don't really need much of a plot, I highly recommend this one. Okay, now onto the nonfiction category. I wanted to highlight Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. This is such an important read, whether you're asexual or not. If you are, it's so validating. But if you're not, there's so much you can learn from this book, not just about asexual people, but also about society and how sex is so ingrained in our everyday lives. There's so much more to being ace than most people think. It's a wide spectrum from demisexual all the way to fully sex averse, and there's so much in between. As someone who has identified as demi for a few years now, this book is just so important to me. I've seen so much discourse about the use of that identity and how it's just made up, or people just use it to be quirky or different, or they just have a low sex drive. But this book taught me so much about not only my own identity, but other identities across the ace spectrum, and it really made me feel so seen and understood. I also think it did a really good job of critiquing the role sex plays in our society while not slut-shaming at the same time, which apparently is hard to do. But yeah, I'm so glad I found this book when I did, and I highly recommend it to anyone, especially if you yourself are ace, or you think you might be ace, or if you know someone who is and you want to understand them better. Last, for the nonfiction section, I have How Far the Light Reaches by Sabrina Imbler. This book combines two of my favorite things, science writing and books about being queer. It's part marine science, part memoir, and each chapter blends facts about marine animals with stories from Imbler's life as a queer Asian person. The structure makes it such a unique, engaging read. And I do think it helped that I'm a queer person who has a science degree, so I found both of these elements so fun, even if they weren't always seamlessly blended. I just love this book so much, and I desperately need more recommendations for books like these that are more literary leaning, science-y nonfiction. I mean, two of my favorite books of all time are Braiding Sweetgrass and Entangled Life, and I think this book fits perfectly into that category, and with the added bonus that it's gay. I will say it can be kind of a tough read. I definitely recommend checking content warnings. For any of the books on this list, please check content warnings. But this one does have discussions of sexual assault, but also weight and fat phobia, and some other heavy topics. But I do highly recommend it if you're queer and love science. Okay, now for my honorable mentions. I'm gonna go a little more rapid fire in this section, hopefully. These are some of the queer books I've read that just didn't quite work for me for whatever reason. But I have read reviews saying people adored these books, so they definitely can work for some people. So first I have Chlorine by Jade Song. This is basically about a girl who wants to be a mermaid, but more than that, it's about not feeling like you belong and the experience of growing up as a queer person. I still genuinely don't know how I feel about this book. Parts of it I absolutely loved, and all the ideas and themes were great. And if you're into body horror, there are a few parts that are genuinely disgusting. I also did love just how weird it is. Like, it's not like anything I've ever read. It did this thing where the first half was basically just a coming of age story, and the second half was gruesome body horror, which seems like a really cool idea. I just don't think the execution really did it for me, and I didn't love the writing style. All that being said, I did love the queer elements of this. This book genuinely broke my heart. Definitely don't go into it if you're looking for a sweet, happy romance that has a happy ending, because you're not going to get that. So next up in my honorable mentions, I have Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. This is a book about a young trans girl who runs away from home and gets taken in by a former famous violinist as her apprentice. I genuinely love the queer elements of this. We get to see an Asian trans girl who desperately wants to hide her transness at all costs. And we also have a middle-aged sapphic romance, which I just love to see older queer representation. But overall, there's just way too much going on in this book, and I think it would have heavily benefited from more editing, or honestly just being split up into like 2 or 3 books where we could better develop the plot and the characters and the themes. I have seen a lot of good reviews on this book though, so. Last, I have another Sarah Waters book, and that is Fingersmith. I genuinely love almost everything about this book except for the length, and unfortunately that kind of ruined the whole book for me. It starts and ends so strong, and there's like genuinely the craziest plot twist halfway through. I really think it could have been a million times more enjoyable if it was just tightened up a little and cut down by like 200 pages. This book is almost 600 pages. There's just no need for it to be that long. There were parts of this that were so boring and hard to get through, especially after the plot twist. It kind of just goes downhill from there, unfortunately. Overall, I love the story, I love the characters, and I really appreciate that Sarah Waters always gives me a happy ending, even if it's not the most realistic ending. Also, this book was the inspiration for the South Korean psychological thriller The Handmaiden, which I watched immediately after reading this book, and that is now one of my favorite movies of all time. It's just incredibly done. All of the pacing issues I had from the book are completely fixed in the movie, and I really hate to say it, but unless you really love a long, slow-paced book, I would just skip the book and watch the movie. It's genuinely so good, and really the main thing going for the book is the plot twist. So I think if I had watched the movie before and already known the plot twist, the book would have been even harder to get through, and I honestly probably would have DNF'd it. So if you want the best viewing experience, just watch the movie. And I honestly didn't think they would keep in all the sapphic elements, but they did, and it's so good. And with that is the end of my list. I hope you found some more books to add to your TBR, or maybe I convinced you to read something that you've been meaning to get to. I wish you all a very happy Pride Month. I love being queer, and it makes me so happy how many books and media in general there are that are showcasing a wide variety of the queer experience. I always wonder if I would have come out sooner if books like these were more normalized and accessible when I was younger. But regardless, I'm just so glad that they're becoming more mainstream and popular. And I'm so happy for the younger generations who get to grow up with books and media like these. As a late bloomer, I'm just glad that I found these books when I did. they're all so important to me. So with that, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!